Hi, this is Tracy Swedlow, and I'm host of Televisionation. And I am very happy to offer these vlogs or video podcasts to make sure that the TV industry is connecting and visible and seeing what's going on. We're all in each other's homes or in private offices, perhaps. And this show, I'm very excited to have Scott Ehrlich, who's the SVP of Growth and Content for Sinclair Broadcasting. I don't think I actually read your title correct, Scott, but welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's good to see you. It's good to see anybody these days.
Yeah. Is that your COVID beard?
It is. This will be a one-time appearance, hopefully.
My dad used to shave off his mustache, his beard, like Labor Day and then Memorial Day, and it used to be like a rhythm thing. But now everybody's dealing with this. I have to cut my husband's hair at some point this weekend. We'll see.
Yeah, I haven't even started to contemplate stuff like that yet.
One thing on my head. Speaking of which, okay. So I'm really happy to welcome you to the show. We have Sinclair at our conferences, TV of Tomorrow show, very often, but we've never had you there. But you have so much experience. You have been in the business for a million years. You even have a Wikipedia page of your own. You've been involved early days of Fox News. You worked with Roger Ailes to put all these kinds of things together. Do you want to talk a little bit about your background?
Sure. I mean, yeah, the gray hair is not fake. I earned every single one of them. I've been doing this for now since the early 90s. My first job in television was working on syndicated shows in 91, 92. Moved to NBC in 93, and NBC Cable. We were part of the team that went to turn around CNBC. We launched a network called America's Talking, which nobody's ever heard of because it's now called MSNBC. We did that deal with Microsoft to rebrand it and turn it into a proper news channel. And then a whole bunch of us left and went across the river to Fox and started the Fox News Channel, which was probably the wildest year of my life. We went from an abandoned storeroom in the basement, a Sam Goody, which for those of you who don't remember is a record store,
right,
and a women's clothing store called Strawberries. And we arrived in February, and then we landed on that. And for reasons that I still don't understand, my boss promised the big boss that we'd have a news channel up and running from that start in less than 6 months. And then we did, and it was in the middle of an election year, and launching a national news channel. It was very different than what we'd done at NBC, which was turnaround on CNBC and launching a talk channel, which was something that's fairly straightforward actually, to creating a news operation out of basically thin air. And that was amazing. About a year after that, I left. I moved over to News Corp and worked for James Murdoch. We started News Corp's first internet division. We actually started streaming. I did my first streaming event was in the spring of '96. We actually launched a Sunday morning show for Fox, and we launched it so quickly we didn't have a studio. And so for 12 weeks in a row, we did remote live audio streams from a series of historical houses around DC while we got this show up and running.
That's so early, very early.
It was insane. It was insane. Yeah. We had to drop dual ISDN lines, for those of you who even remember what an ISDN line is, into these houses every single week, and set up and do a live broadcast, and it worked. And then when Real Video launched in '97,
and that worked on an ISDN line. Oh,
yeah. Well, it was just audio, right? It was just audio. Actually, it's interesting. So the next year, February of '97 is when Real Video 1.0 launched. And we were a launch partner at Fox, and we actually simulcast the Fox News Channel for a year on the internet before we got caught by the big bosses, and we had to take it down. But I remember in those days having an argument with our CFO about moving from a 28 kilobit video stream to a 56 kilobit stream. And he was like, "You're going to kill the network. You're cannibalizing our revenue streams." And I'm like, little postage stamp at 7 frames a second. If that's going to cannibalize our television business, we probably have some bigger issues. Yeah, no, that was a really interesting time. It was I don't know, it was a wild time to kind of be in the business, and certainly be in the business of streaming. And so since 96, 97 to now, and however many years that's been the consistent theme in my career, is finding ways to take stuff that had traditionally only been on television, and then making it available on the internet, and understanding that.
And you co-founded QU, right?
I did, which was actually an interesting, that was sort of the moment in time where I went backwards. I was joking with a friend about 3 years ago, right before I came to Sinclair, that, he and I had started in streaming in the 90s together. I'm like, how is it 20 years after we started streaming, we're both sitting here in broadcasting businesses? I sort of didn't see it playing out that way. But Q was sort of an attempt to take it the other way. I'd been producing a lot of videos directly for the internet, and probably about 2008, I kind of made a pivot in my career to focus more on working with creative people and creating quality content for the internet. I felt like the distribution was getting to the point where you could work with, in my case, the big project I worked on was called the Legion of Extraordinary Dancers, and my creative partner was John M. Chu, who.
Exciting stuff. Very exciting programming.
Indeed. Yeah. And I just thought it was a good time to get people to put real money and really talented creative people, and give them the internet as a medium for filmed entertainment and for expression. And LXD, surpassed all of our wildest expectations.
Yeah.
But then I got into making more and more of this content, working with more creative people. And I started to notice that people were good at one of two things, but rarely both, right? They were either really good at building traffic and following on the internet, or they were really good at creating content. John was one of the rare creative people that's good at both. At least then. There's more now, but then it was somewhat rare. And I hit this point of frustration of seeing this great content being created and put out, and then nobody would see it. And so I started thinking, okay, what if we reverse this? What if we take this great content from the internet and we harness it for television? And that was really why we started Q, was a 24-hour network to highlight the best content from the internet in a television vehicle. That then led me to a partnership with Sinclair Broadcasting to launch a network called TBD, which we did in I think February of 17, somewhere around there, which was sort of a US version of what we'd started with Q. And that eventually led me to come to Sinclair, where I still oversee TBD in our portfolio of what we call growth networks. So we have 4 over-the-air broadcast networks: TBD, Comet, which is a science fiction network, Charge, which is an action network, and then Stadium, which is a sports network.
Why did I thought Comet was started by MGM?
So Comet started off as a partnership between MGM and Sinclair.
Okay.
And so MGM did a lot of the channel management, a lot of the programming in the first couple of years. And towards the end of last year, we actually brought that in-house and started running it with an in-house team. And so far, so good on that.
I love science and fiction and space topics. So I remember having a long conversation with the guy who spoke for us at a TVOT show all about Comet, thinking like that's a fantastic platform for so many people who are interested in science programming. I know at some point maybe you guys will make it interactive, and but that's a longer story. So I want to sort of give people an understanding of the overall sort of scope of Sinclair and understand what you're doing there, your purview. From what I understand, you have 191 TV stations, local TV stations, right?
Yep.
And 22 regional sports networks.
Correct.
And then you said you own those networks that you just mentioned. You didn't mention Stir and the Tennis Channel.
So yeah, when we get to so Stir is our OTT platform. Stir has about 110 channels on it. Anchored by a local channel that essentially what we created when we launched Stir. So Stir's about a little over a year old, coming up in a year and a half. the idea was to create an OTT
You guys
service
won
that
one of
was
our
local
awards
first.
last year. Oh, sorry, I interrupted you. You won one
No,
of
no,
our
sorry.
leadership awards last year.
Yes, we did. Thank you very much for
Yeah.
the recognition. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
But the idea was to create an OTT service that had as its anchor local. Effectively, what we wound up doing is creating about 80 local independent television stations. We launched them all on the same day, which was quite a task. But if you go into Stir and you pick your city, you'll see, you pick in Stir Seattle, right? And the Seattle version of Stir is anchored by Como's News, and Como's an ABC affiliate up there that we operate. And around that programming, we program what would otherwise be syndicated content and other local content. It's gotten more and more local over the year and a half that we've been running it, and it's been really a great success story for us. The OTT business has been absolutely on fire, and particularly over the last 4 or 6 weeks. But really over the last year and a half, we've seen the ad-supported. It started being called the FAST ecosystem, the free ad-supported streaming television, because we needed more acronyms in this business.
I've got a few: TVOT, ITVT, yes.
Right. Go ahead.
You guys have a real diversified portfolio. On one hand, like you said, things are growing like gangbusters in the streaming universe. However, you've got all these sports networks that must be a very difficult time to manage and balance. So tell me a little bit about what your role is in helping these kinds of things grow. I mean, maybe it's not your decision to handle the sports networks. I'm not sure. Kind of confused, like how is Sinclair handling this kind of lopsided situation where part of your business is probably growing and part of your other is struggling, I'm assuming? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, look, I sit on the local news and broadcasting side of the business, and so the way we're structured is we have a sports division, and then we have the local news and marketing division, and I sit on that side of the company. So, I'm not really directly involved in
the sports stuff
doing with the sports business. But yeah, look, sports is a business that's about live, and while we're in this period of waiting for live events to get back, we're figuring out all sorts of new and interesting and innovative ways to feed the audience's passion for competition.
It's interesting is from the tracking that I've been studying is that for people who aren't watching sports, they're looking for news. So you have that type of content right there. So how are you supporting their interest in what's going on and giving them more news and being more innovative?
So one of the things I think we're really proud of, actually is something that we put up on Stir. So on Stir, we launched a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, a COVID-19 channel. And the idea was to do it a little bit differently. There's plenty of places that you can turn to get analysis and opinion and, a 6-person panel with everybody yelling at each other. And that does sort of, feel like a saturated part of the market. So what we did is we went with a different kind of philosophy, which is core to our company, right? Our internal kind of mantra is connecting people to content everywhere. And one of the things that we wanted to do with the COVID-19 channel on Stir was connect people to the actual news. And so that channel has no commentary, it has no anchors. It presents all of the press conferences. We try in their entirety, but raw. It's the direct feed from the press conference. You can watch the press conference. You can hear for yourself what whoever the official giving the press conference has to say. You can listen to all the questions being asked by all the press, and you can make up your own mind. And you make your own decisions about how it affects you and how you want to interpret that information. But we thought that would be a different way to approach it, be a more internet way to approach it.
We could use a national channel like that. I think it was supposed to be C-SPAN, but I mean, it'd be good to get that kind of stuff over a digital environment.
Yeah, so far it's been very successful. From the time it launched a month ago to now, it's consistently been one of the top viewed channels on Stir, along with the local news. Comment and Charge got new programming lineups last week, so they've had a nice little bump too. So we're proud of that.
Cool. So how is the local news business faring? I believe they're growing, right, in this environment.
Certainly in terms of viewership, right? Look, the historical tie between a local community and their television news personalities is a very treasured and sacred thing. It is a different relationship than people have with a national news personality. It's a much more, for lack of a better way to put it, intimate relationship. But certainly trust is at the core of it. And when things go sideways in life, people turn to their local news. And we're keenly aware of that responsibility. We're keenly aware of the value of that relationship. And that's really what we've been trying to do, is serve our communities. And whether that's, we have a campaign with the Salvation Army to raise money in these communities. We have—
I saw that, like several $100,000, right? That you were able to raise.
It's been very successful, yeah. But whether it's efforts like that or efforts to work with our clients, the local advertisers, to help them maintain presence and visibility in those markets through these times, the ones that are open and the ones that aren't open. Those are all really important elements of what we do day in and day out. And one of the amazing things to me, I mean, you said, I've been in the business a long time, and that's true. And I've also had a lot of jobs over those 25, 30 years. We have something like 20% of our workforce has been at the company for 20 years or more. And that statistic blew me away. But what it is those local relationships that now go back decades that are very hard to replace, and are the types of things that I think people want to rely on in a time like this. The ability to talk to somebody who has been there as you've built your business, has been there as you've grown your business, has been a partner to you, has been a sounding board for you. And we take those relationships very, very seriously. And this is the time where those kinds of relationships and partnerships really set themselves apart from other types of relationships. It's just, it's a little hard to describe, obviously, but or a little hard for me anyway. But it is incredibly important, and I think more important today. And that's a big part of what we're doing. A big part of what we're doing is also making sure that on the air, we're getting as much direct information to people as we can. We are covering those local press conferences. We are making them available online. We are making them available through Stir nationally. All of those things add up to, really us trying to do our part to make sure that people have the best information, the most current information about what's happening close to them. And I think that really is what people. I know here, I live in Los Angeles, where we don't actually have a local television station here. But that's where I find myself going, right? I find myself going to the local news, much more so than the national news. National news is important, and it's important to understand what's going on across the country. It's critical to understand what's happening across the street, though.
Sinclair has been very proactive and involved in the move towards ATSC 3.0, NextGen TV. And your CEO, Chris Ripley, came to our show a few years ago to discuss this in the early stages, and we were very grateful for that visit. And I'm just kind of curious, I don't know if you're involved in those kinds of discussions, but it's almost like, isn't this the time to put, to help and initiate those things into place? There's a lot of work going on in that universe, of course, but are there some experiments going on? Are you guys going to be doing anything soonish? You working with some of the trials out there that are happening? Or on the flip side of that, maybe you're experimenting with some of the ideas of interactivity and providing things online on the internet that's happening within the local news broadcast. Maybe you're delivering those assets and experimenting. I'm asking sort of a, what's happening
what's happening with 3.0?
3.0, but it's also how are there growth opportunities to explore new types of interactive content in this situation where people are turning to their local channels maybe just delivering it to the internet? Is there more stuff happening? It's a very big open-ended question. So
yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we're doing. Some of which predates the current crisis, which has sort of had its own innovation cycle, if you will, already. But we started, for example, in Ohio, we started a 24-hour news channel in Dayton, Ohio. It was originally Dayton. Yeah.
Dayton. Why not Columbus, my hometown?
So ironically, it is now expanded to Columbus.
Okay.
So we started this thing, and the idea was, could we do a small footprint 24-hour news operation that was very, very, hyper local, and then could we replicate it? And so we started with Dayton, and now we have it available for multiple cities in Ohio. The app is called Ohio 24/7 now. And that was something that we did, thinking, okay, in a world where 3.0 enables a lot more channels, we felt like there would be room for a, fully dedicated channel to local news.
Mm-hmm.
And then the question became, okay, how can you support that? How can you build a production and staffing model that that was sustainable and both did the job of creating a important local newscast, did the job of getting people, live breaking news as it happens, and also did the job of doing so in a way that was economically sustainable, even in a smaller market. Obviously, there have been very, very big successes with local news channels in places like New York and here in LA, but in smaller cities, it's a bit more of a challenge. And so far, that experiment's been a really good success. Like I said, we've rolled it out statewide in the state of Ohio. We're looking at other places in the country where maybe that would make sense. That's the kind of thing that, as we start to think about what's possible with 3.0 and what we would do with that that expanded ability to deliver content to people, what would be ways that we'd use it? And that's one. Stir is really another. Stir is another sort of, path to 3.0. A lot of the things that we're learning in operating a 100+ channel service on OTT platforms, we think will apply and translate as we make the transition to 3.0 and as we start to think about what kinds of products are going to make sense in the 3.0 world. So that effort, from everything we've done on the product side, and we have a great product team up in Seattle, to the editorial team, which is primarily here in Los Angeles, and our sales team, Compulse OTT, which is really the engine that drives it from an economic standpoint. Those are all things that are going to contribute to what we look like in the future, in what's really an IP broadcasting world. And so Stir is our first, maybe not our first, but perhaps our most ambitious IP broadcasting effort to date. And certainly you can draw a line from everything we're doing there and learning there to where we think it's going to go.
So are you involved in watching what your advertisers are doing in this environment? Is that something that you're able to?
I mean, to some degree, yeah. I mean, with the networks, there it's much more direct for me. So with Comment and Charge and TBD, I have a much more direct role in the sales side there. I help out across some of the other stuff.
Okay, well then, switching back to content. Now that you can see that people are hungering for more content, and you have a lot of it, but are there opportunities that you're exploring now, or is there something coming out you could hint to that where you're going to launch another channel, or there's some need that needs to be fulfilled? Is there some way to offer like home conversation channel or something with people in their homes like this, talking about sports? I mean, there's so many people exploring these ideas in pockets. So I'm kind of curious if there are growth opportunities for Sinclair that hasn't been put out yet that you think would be exciting.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of recent ones I would highlight. So last week we added Battlestar Galactica, Quantum Leap, Sliders, and Night Gallery to Comet. And we added Magnum PI and Knight Rider to Charge. And our TBD network Saturday night premiered their first original show, which was called The Link. And The Link is a different kind of a show. It's a show that's designed to kind of take a viewer through a journey through the video internet, which is really what TBD has always been about, is showcasing the best videos from the internet and packaging them for TV. And The Link was really designed around a host taking you on that journey. You click on a link, and then you click on another link, and then you click on another link, and before you know it, you've spent a lot of time on the internet watching videos. And that's the vibe, if you will, that we were trying to bring to television. And the show, the show premiered Saturday night, did really well.
Like a curator, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely curator. And so we're really excited about that. And that's a different approach to programming than we've taken in the past. At the same time, we're innovating on how we do production. And that's really, I said there's been an innovation cycle spurred by the current crisis. A lot of that has been, how do we do production remotely? How do we do production in a way where we don't need as many people coming into a studio, or indeed, do we need anybody coming into a studio? The team at Stadium in Chicago has been doing a virtual show or a remote produced show. It's been on the air now for 3 weeks. And it's done very well. They do that for our marquee network in Chicago, which is the partnership with the Cubs. And on the news side, we've been building a workflow and building a process for running a newscast that looks like a regular newscast, but being able to do it remotely. And we actually did our first 2 last week in Gainesville, Florida. The good news was nobody noticed we produced it differently. And it worked, which is also always a good thing when you're doing these kind of high wire acts. But I think those kinds of things are going to have a fundamental impact on how we do things going forward, because now we know that we can do these things. We know that we can do these things at a quality level that makes sense, with a level of authenticity that makes sense. Like, as we've dug more into like what people want from local, right? The 3 things that come out over and over and over again, right? Live, local, authentic, right? And one thing about these remote produced shows and seeing people that you normally are used to seeing in a much more glossy, contained environment, seeing them in their homes, in their kitchens, in their living rooms, that brings an authenticity to the communication that a studio environment distances you from a little bit.
Yeah, how are you handling that? Because I know normally they deal with teleprompters and content that's written for them, and how are they able to do that authoritatively? Do they feel comfortable speaking off the top of their head about the news that maybe they've read a summary about? I mean, how is that working?
Well, listen, mostly professional news people are used to, at some point in their news career, they're anchoring live coverage, and so they're used to being able to formulate thoughts as they go. Obviously, better than me, which is why they do that and I do this. But all the tools that they use in the studio, like one of the things as we looked at remote production, we looked to replicate that, right? So I know that one of our weather personalities, we sent a crew to paint one wall of his garage green so that he could do his weathercast from home the same way he's used to doing it. Another one, we sent a pop-up green screen to their house. They set it up in the kitchen. We had to send one person to go set it up, but now the anchor can or in this case, with weather personality, can use it on their own. Those sorts of things we've definitely had to think through. We've also had to think through, how do you get a teleprompter set up into somebody's house? And the answer is a tablet computer. It's not, it's just something that's important, not just necessarily for them to be able to, know what they're saying next, but to know what's happening in the show next, and remember, who they're tossing to, or what package is coming up. At the same time, somebody has to be controlling the broadcast. Somebody has to be producing the broadcast and directing the broadcast. That person needs to be able to talk to the anchor. And so, the sort of traditional IFB mechanism doesn't work when you're not in the studio. but you have to replicate the ability for the talent to be able to talk to the producer without that being on air in order to run the broadcast in a smooth way. So a lot of these things that we're used to having in a studio, we've replicated for the remote production environment. Some of them better than others, still a work in progress. But we've now gotten to a point where we have a level of confidence of our ability to keep the news on the air kind of no matter what happens. And that's really, that was really the goal of it to begin with. That being said, if you take all of that stuff that we've been learning in a really accelerated way and play it forward as to what the implications of it in the future, it gets really, really interesting. You know, you start to think about markets where perhaps it wasn't viable to have a news operation, and now we've lowered the barrier to entry to a point where maybe it does. And we can bring a local news operation to a smaller and smaller community in a way that's robust and impactful and consistent with what we're trying to do as a company, which is, again, is to connect people to the right content.
But it also probably means that, you know, when this is over, and everybody keeps using that word, although I don't know when it's going to be over, but when we go back to being, you know, in studios, I mean, do you think you'll go back to being in studios? I mean, because now you won't need all those camera people. You will, these local news teams will be either shrunken forever because you will have, you know, made it much more efficient, or we will go back to that sort of super high quality, slick environment. I mean, I know this is not really your area of expertise, but the economics of that, the sort of politics of that, the social issues that come up as a result of that are very, very complex and are going to impact the whole TV industry, I think, greatly. So, and yes, you'll be more nimble. You'll be able to be, you know, flexible and go new, interesting places, but the whole community, you know, is facing this.
Well, also don't forget that there's many more opportunities to program. So even in a bigger city, right? Again, go back to the 3.0 point. If there is 2, 3, 4, 5 times the channel capacity in a market that you have today, you're going to have to be creating more content to feed that. And so the notion that news in that market, even a big market like Los Angeles or New York, that local news is going to be confined to, you know, the windows of timed broadcasts, you know, I think is unrealistic. I think, you know, if you have that much more capacity, you're going to want to create more local content using that capacity, and lowering the sort of barrier to entry for production allows you to think about, you know, think about how you address that in a completely different way. I don't think it's so much about whether or not you go back to a studio or you don't go back to a studio. I think we will go back to studios. I think that's kind of an established staple. But the question is, when those studios go dark now, right? So, you know, have a newscast that goes from 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock, and then 6 o'clock everybody goes home, or more likely they turn it over to the crew that's getting ready for a 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock newscast. But what happens in between that? What happens in between that 6 o'clock newscast and that 11 o'clock newscast? What else can you do now that you don't need as much to get on the air? Could you have an extended newscast that today lives in OTT, tomorrow lives on a multicast channel? Those are the questions that I'm eager to get into, right? You know, as we kind of come out of this and move into, okay, what comes next? And I think a lot of what we've had to figure out in this period will pay off in the world of 3.0. Just because you know, if you look at the characteristics of it, and the opportunity to do significantly more local content, and I think what's now become an even more sharply tuned and greater appetite for local content. I think those kind of converge in that 3.0 world.
I think that hyper local, we use that term, right, has become more interesting also to people. But because the people who do provide hyper local news resources might be in an app form right now, like we have one here in San Francisco called Citizen, which I think is in more cities than just San Francisco, but they don't really have, you know, anchors. They don't have authoritative voices. Anybody can shoot up some video, and they've got a map, and you can see what the police, you know, might have said, but it's all in text. It's an app form. It'd be interesting and see if there's ways to partner with these existing apps or to start your own, or just work with some of these, website news sources that cover specific communities within the city, neighborhoods, and to be a much more nimble, comprehensive news service, like you're saying, when people are interested, which might be, later in the evening, after the regular and local news broadcast is over. Maybe they want to hear what's happening in their immediate neighborhood. So I'm looking forward to seeing how you guys evolve your capabilities to communicate to people in their own communities. But that's a big task because obviously there's so many of them. And interesting to see if you can work with local journalists or an individual who might be naturally inclined, might want to sort of step up to the plate and to act as a citizen journalist with you. I'm just coming up with ideas. I'm sure you've already thought all of those things, but
they're definitely similar to ideas that we've either thought about or conversations we have with
or like Nextdoor. Do you know Nextdoor? Do you guys have that?
I do.
Okay,
Yep.
so they don't have a video broadcast capability, but they're very hyper local.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, there's a few different things that we've done, and a lot of stuff I think we'll do in the future, right? We have a product called News On.
Who's on?
Yeah.
Like News as on. In like the old comedy routine between the
No.
News, baseball. News. Who's on third?
No. News On.
Abbott and Costello? No.
It's a partnership of I think we have 18 station groups contributing to that. So you can imagine some of those meetings might mirror a comedy routine, but the service itself has over 200 local broadcasts in it, local news broadcasts in it, and we view that as a really good starting point, right? We've aggregated the news in a way with our partners that you can go and you can look at news from. The example I usually use is a hurricane. A hurricane is destined for Florida, and you can go and you can look at how it's being covered in West Palm Beach, how it's being covered in Miami, how it's being covered in Tampa, Gainesville, Tallahassee, Orlando, and get the different perspectives as you go around the different state. And again, get it in a way that's unfiltered. You're watching that local newscast directly. We're not rounding it up and summarizing it for you. You can go and watch it for yourself. And I think that's to me that's one of the consistent threads in what happens next, right? Is more opportunities for people to get direct access to the news, direct access to the news makers, and then be able to make their own decisions about what it is they want to believe, what their take on the information is.
We're kind of going over our time a little bit, but because you have such a long history working in the news business, any thoughts about the mainstream news outlets out there? Are they doing a good job, a bad job? There's all these alternative news voices, independent news voices on YouTube trying to get an audience or successfully getting audiences. There's so many people who are competing to try to tell all these stories. Do you have any feelings or criticisms you want to make of all your former colleagues?
Yeah, and I'm sure there's several of them I could blurt out that would get me in instant trouble. But
I had to throw that question. I had to throw that question.
I appreciate it. Look, I think everybody has their role to play, and I think it's important for people to keep in mind that these are commercial operations, right? They do things. They do things to be self-sustaining, to be profitable, to draw audience. And I think that's all fine as long as you recognize that that's what it is. At the national level, at the local level, it's a different story. Like, we're not trying to put on a show. We're trying to give people information. And it's just, to me, it's a different exercise. I think, I think the rise or not rise, the ease of access to direct information is the big differentiator, and the big thing that's changed. The fact that you have on my TV over here, I have a Facebook Watch app that can get me access to raw feeds of press conferences. And it's not the only way to get it, but it happens to deliver it to my TV.
Cool.
That to me is that's something that really didn't exist 10 years ago. 10 years ago, all the news you got was filtered through somebody, and you've seen certainly over, when we started Fox in '96, so over the last, call it 25 years, that I think has been the consistent thread, is people have more and more direct access to the information and to the newsmakers. And that trend continuing changes the roles of the different people in the news chain, right? It doesn't change that much for the local news, although it gives us the opportunity to program more hours of it, make more of it available as we've had different platforms that we can put that programming onto, right? First it was the internet, OTT, mobile apps, right? And it makes the national news media more and more of a more and more like the opinion section of a newspaper, right? And so people tune to the news organization that probably most reflects their own point of view.
Mhm.
And it becomes less about how they get the information and more how they develop their opinion on what it means for them. And that's an evolution of the different roles, I think, in the news chain.
Well observed. I didn't actually ask you about your home office there. I see like several big screens, and there's, are you okay
yeah.
over there? You've got your whole news operation in front of you. I can see in your bed.
I'm good. I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for most of the last 20 years, but the sort of working at a company thing is kind of a new thing to me over the last couple of years. It's been a long break since I've worked at Fox. So I was pretty well equipped here to begin with. And yeah, I like screens. I have a lot of them around.
You're like the guy with like the wall of screens all looking at him at the same time or something,
That's sort of my dream office, just being surrounded by screens.
All right, well, sounds good. Is there anything else that you'd like to add? Otherwise, I think it sounds like a really good understanding of what is going on over there at Sinclair and your interests. We really appreciate what you're doing to keep the news flowing or content, and to keep the operation, supporting the community. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was good to talk to you, and hopefully we'll be able to see each other in person soon.
You're invited. All right. Thanks so much. Don't go anywhere. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Cut.